Good morning to our viewers in the United States and good afternoon to our viewers in Europe. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany. Thank you for joining us for this virtual transatlantic town hall with 3 Bundestag members. Here in the United States and around the world, attention has been focused on the United States throughout the campaign season, on Election Day, and during that nail-biting period while we waited for the votes to be counted. I'm delighted to welcome 3 Bundestag members to hear their reactions to the US election and to talk about what the results mean for the German-American relationship moving forward. Today's event is being held as part of WunderbarTogether USA 2020, a comprehensive and collaborative initiative funded by the German Federal Foreign Office and administered by the Goethe-Institut. Christoph Bernstiel is a member of the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, and was directly elected to the German Bundestag in 2017. He represents the district of Halle in the federal state of Saxony-Anhalt. He's a member of the Committee for Homeland Security, where he focuses on cybercrime, and the Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence. Herzlich willkommen.
Hello.
And Katja Keul was elected to the Bundestag in 2009. She's a member of Alliance 90, the Greens, and represents Nienburg-Schaumburg in Lower Saxony. She's a member of the Parliamentary Defense Committee and a delegate to the Federal Working Group on Peace and International Affairs. Prior to joining the Bundestag, she was an attorney at the Stolzenau District Court and then practiced law. Thank you for joining us, Katja.
Thank you.
And we hope to be joined shortly by Metin Hakverdi, who joined the Social Democratic Party in 2002 and has been a member of the German Bundestag since 2013. He serves on the Bundestag's Committee on European Union Affairs and on the Finance Committee. Before being elected to the Bundestag, he was a member of the Parliament of the Free and Hanseatic City of Hamburg from 2008 to 2013. And there he is. Metin, it's good to see you.
Hey, Steve, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's quite all right. You're all here. And I would actually like to get started by asking each of you how you spent Election Day and the days thereafter as the results were being reported. And I'd like to start with you, Katja. You were actually in the United States for the election. You were part of a small group of election observers deployed by the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or the OSCE. And after some briefings in Washington, D.C., you actually went on to Michigan. What was that like? What was your experience like?
Well, first of all, thank you for organizing this exchange. Yes, actually, I left Washington the day before the election to go to Michigan. And what was surprising to me was that actually, while we were thinking that Washington is a peaceful and safe place and Michigan might be dangerous, it was exactly the other way around. In Washington, we saw all the businesses protecting their buildings and everything looked like we were just a hurricane coming up. And in Michigan, we had a really peaceful and well-organized election day. We started off in Detroit downtown and then worked our way through different counties in the direction to Lansing. I think one was called Brighton. We had several poll stations there. And then in the evening, we came back again to Detroit downtown. So we saw about 10 different poll stations in different areas. And we were convinced that we didn't see anything to worry about. We saw it well organized, and especially all the procedures concerning the absentee ballots and the mail-in ballots were well explained and well handled, so that there's no worry that people could vote twice or anything. So we had a long but a very effective day. Yes.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting was the head of the OSCE delegation, Ursula Gesek, was interviewed fairly frequently in the US press. And she talked about the fact that given that the election rules are so different from state to state, it almost felt as if the OSCE was observing 50 different elections rather than one. Is that something that a sentiment that you share?
Well, of course, it's not only 50, it's actually 9,000 to 10,000 different election jurisdictions, because it's the counties doing their own jurisdiction, and then sometimes even the counties give it to the communities, delegate it further. So of course, it makes things a little more complicated observing elections in the United States than it is otherwise, and probably also for the voters in the United States, for the American voters also, sometimes it can be kind of confusing with different procedures for registration. And of course, these are things that have been reported in the OSCE report also during the last elections 4 years ago and before that. So these are concerns that have always been there. It would be easier to have a clear nationwide election procedure. But this time that was actually not the focus. But at least I could, like I did it 4 years in Florida, I could see this time in Michigan how different elections are in Florida, what works better, what works better, what doesn't work too good. And yeah, to tell you the truth, I thought the procedures in Michigan were handled a lot better actually than what I saw in Florida 4 years ago.
Thank you. And Christoph, where were you on election day, and how did you follow the tallying of the votes as they were coming in?
Yeah, warm welcome from my side, here from Halle in my constituency. As you can see, we are banned to home office, even in the German Bundestag. But at the moment, we have no session week. But last week, there was a session week, and I was in Berlin, and it was a main topic among us was the election, of course. And if you had switched on the TV, the German TV, the shows were completely full of special broadcastings depending the election, and it was a very tough race. And I can very good remember last week we had 3 screens. We watched TV, we were online, and we of course watched Twitter, and that was the most exciting thing. And for me, something which was really remarkable was that the US media had different conclusions. So if you had watched CNN, you received different infos than on Fox News, and that goes the whole night. And for me and my colleagues, it was pretty clear, even before the election, that we will not have a result at election evening. And to be honest, we expected a tough race, and that was it, and it still is. We have now a discussion how President Trump will react or accept the result of the vote, and we still have some states where we do not have a decision. I have the map here. So it is and it was a very exciting election, and for me, I'm very glad that it was mostly peaceful. I'm not heard about any violence or such other terrible things. So that was something which I'm really glad of. And we will see what the next days will bring, but they are still very exciting, and we have a very close look on what happens in the United States at the moment.
I think you're absolutely right. Even for election observers here in the US, obviously everybody was watching the Associated Press because many media institutions were following the indications from the AP as to the results. But it was interesting. I always had the New York Times open, and they didn't call some of the elections that the Associated Press called. So as the data was coming in, there were certainly different interpretations of it. But Metin, let me come to you. In addition to serving as the chairman of the U.S. North American Working Group within the SPD parliamentary group in the Bundestag, you have your own personal experiences in the United States. You attended high school in Simi Valley, California. You studied law in Indiana. What were you watching on Election Day and the days thereafter?
Well, hi to New York. I hope everybody's fine. I see this famous living room wall behind you, Steve, so I hope that everybody's well with you. Actually, it didn't help this time to have studied in Indiana. I went to school in California because those results were pretty clear. So Joe Biden did not make it to win Indiana as Obama did in 2008. But I was surprised. I was super surprised. Last year I spent a lot of time in the Carolinas and in Georgia, so I wasn't surprised at all that Georgia would be this super hardcore battleground. But the numbers were just so awkward of the turnout, and it me personally getting up because I did all this what everybody did on election day, right? So we're just basically switching from channel to channel and website to website, but on Wednesday morning, I thought Biden's going to lose it because the numbers in Pennsylvania and in Georgia were just. I did not believe the early analysis of having the absentee votes and the early voting being so much in favor of the Democrats, especially the absentee votes. If you look at the numbers later in Pennsylvania, obviously those people that were giving us this forecast, they were right, but I didn't believe it. So first time I saw the numbers from Georgia, I thought it's not going to work out. I knew, to my personal opinion, it was impossible to win Florida. If I look at the numbers now, I'd say, well, if you have so many votes on the Democratic side, you can win it. But I've never expected that turnout on the Republican side. I was really shocked on this one. But then all the quality numbers came in later during Wednesday. And for some reason, I felt safe about Nevada and Arizona. If you look at the numbers as they developed, it was close action, but at the result of the end, it was not that close actually. So there were 14,000 votes. Michigan, the great state of Michigan, last time Trump won it with 14,000 votes. So that was close. Now we are well above that. And if you look at the popular vote, this was a demonstration of a majority.
It was the demonstration of a majority, and still 70 million Americans voted for President Trump. And so I do want to ask a little bit about your observations collectively about the record voter turnout and sort of what that means. Obviously, voter participation in the United States is lower than what is traditionally the case in Germany. You're used to much higher voter participation. And so Katja, since you were sort of on the ground, so to say, and there was really record voter turnout this year, the winner was declared after a few days following all the ballots being counted. And as Christoph pointed out, we're still waiting for some final results to come in that shouldn't change the results of the election. And we'll get into the contested part of the election a little bit later. But Katja, do you have faith in American democracy after what you've seen this year?
Yeah, I actually was seriously worried about it. I think, like many Americans as well, I was worried what would happen and if really democracy would get a chance. But I mean, my faith is back. It's now a lot of people here in Germany are already saying, well, it's not going to solve all the problems. It's going to stay difficult on the difficult issues on the agenda. But I would say, well, let's just be released that we don't have 4 more years of Trump, really, because I think the damage would have been even worse coming up than has been in the last 4 years. So it is definitely a fact to be that we all kind of feel really, really relieved. And I think the election showed that the United States is a stable democracy. Still, I have a little worry what's going to happen if the next weeks, because I mean, we haven't seen any violence on election day, but we know there's some people out there militias, weaponized armed militias that haven't been shown up so far. I don't know what kind of their reaction will be as long as the President Trump is not, deciding how he's going to resolve the situation. So I'm still kind of worried if there's going to be some violence coming up still. But I mean, it was a fair and free election. I don't have any doubt about that, even though as OSCE, of course, as I mentioned, we always have some deficits that we criticize that have always been there. But in the end, it is a fair and free election. And both the high turnout shows that both sides were able to mobilize on as well, the Democrats as well as the Republicans. And 70 million people voting for Trump, of course, is something that has to be dealt with. And if his followers remain believing that all these elections were just fraud and fake, that would be a big damage to the democracy and a big challenge for the new president to solve that situation and to win the trust of the people again. So there's some hard times coming up. I think there's some problems, but I do believe that there is a stable, fair, and free election and a stable democracy.
Well, and so since you talked earlier about the fact that when you were in Washington, you saw storefronts being boarded up, and you did not see that when you were in Michigan, maybe it's a positive sign that when I was on my run this morning, I saw stores taking down the wood paneling to protect themselves. So maybe there's hope that we're through the worst of it and that there won't be any violence, even as the current situation draws out. Christoph, Katja was just talking about the 70 million Americans who voted for Trump. That's, of course, the second most for any presidential candidate in US history, and shows that there is support for him and for his policies, at least among some Americans. What does that tell you about the United States?
So first of all, I would say that election is the living proof that the American democracy still is strong, and maybe even stronger than ever before, because you had a new voter record. And one of the basic things for a working democracy is the discourse between two parties or several parties that we have in Germany. And we had that discourse. Totally clear that discourse was sometimes very hard and maybe sometimes not fair, but I'm not here to bring my opinion on that. But the democracy at the end works, and so you had now, and the election was free, and that is a good sign. And even during the Trump years, I had faith in the American democracy, because America is not only about its president, and the German-American relationship is not about the leaders of our two countries. We have so many relationships like the American Council, the German Marshall Fund, and so many other things which still worked even with the Trump administration. And by the way, we still had different things handling together. As a member of a committee for Homeland Security, I can tell you we had still a very strong relationship between your security services and ours. So that is beside the issue of who is president. But you ask about the 70 million voters. I'm not pretty sure if all of them are voters even only for Trump. For me, it's a sign that the Republicans still have a strong and tough base in the German policy. So many of the votes maybe belongs to the Republican Party as well, and many voters are not so convinced for the program or for the politics of the Democratic Party. So maybe many of them are just voted for the Republican base, and then you have a phenomenon or a thing, I better call a thing, we have in Europe too. You have and something like we call the average citizen likes clear and sometimes very unpolite speech, but he thinks it is in the speech of his mouth, in the words he would choose, and it's not so politically correct, but it's very direct. And maybe many of or some of the voters like that speech, even when they don't agree with every move Trump had made. They liked his way to speak and to do it very directly. And maybe some of these votes are supporting that kind of making politics. But even if I don't like it, but I think there's a little bit of truth in that analysis.
Thank you. So jumping off of that, and I want to come back to Metin, because Metin, earlier you were talking about some of the state races, and while it seems clear that Donald Trump lost the White House, Republicans did better than expected in the Congress and in the Senate. And as Christoph was alluding to, this might indicate that people were voting against Donald Trump in this election, but not necessarily against his party. How does that impact how Germans think about the United States?
I just gave you an anecdote from the European Committee of the Bundestag last year. Richard Grenell, the ambassador of the United States, visited the committee, basically being a small Donald Trump in our parliament and telling his stuff what he tells. So it doesn't really matter what he said, because you can imagine it's the same stuff as always. But the reaction of the parties were interesting. He came into the room, and the members of the AfD in the European Committee applauded him. So I think here is more at stake than just as we view the United States. Obviously, there is something going on in Western democracies. Obviously, something is going on in open societies, what I call populism and others, that is more than just a person, more than a party program, but sort of a gut feeling towards liberal democracies and their institutions. So I saw those surveys asking, why did you go to vote? And Democrats, huge chunk of Democrats voted on personal issues, not wanting Donald Trump. And there are some, and those numbers are smaller on the Republican side. So there are some one-issue voters and all that, like the old stuff. But how on earth can you get over 70 million votes in this situation after this 4 years of show without having a sincere disrespect about the institutions as they are run today in the United States? And I see, maybe it's overstated, but I see a connection to demonstrations in Leipzig, what happened in Germany, and to this. I just got a mail from the Trump-Pence Defend Fund Michigan. So Metin, we must defend Michigan. I don't even going to read it to you. At the end, he wants my money to finance legal moves against what you, Katja, observed in Michigan. So this fight is still going on in spite of the fact whether the institutions are seriously harmed. I agree, obviously, hopefully we are right on this one till January. The institutions will survive. Democracy is obviously surviving in the United States, but there is something going on. With 70 million people, voters, there are millions of voters showed up that did not participate in an election in the past 14 or 16 years. What's wrong with those guys? Come on. What do they think of democracy, of the rule of law, of the rule of the Supreme Court in that country, and the meaning of Republicans and Democrats as a marketplace of ideas, as it was named back in the constitutional days, right? So there is a deeper problem. So this is my answer to your question, because you asked me, what do Germans think of the United States? Of course, there are a lot of Germans thinking the United States are just crazy. This president was crazy, and now there is somebody else there. And a lot of people are falling in love with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. Okay, this is a campaign result. It was with that on Obama as well. But if you look at it a little more deeper, you see that this is a reflection, the result. The good news is we won. We as Democrats, we as people that are defending the open society. But gosh, in that country, the opposition is super big, obviously. You can, if you look at the House seats in detail, if you count all those guys that were voted in the midterms in 2018 on the first Trump wave, after he got elected and then midterms, and you add up those guys the first time, the freshman year, now coming in, those guys are crazy, and they are members of Congress, and they are a problem. They continue to be a problem, and they have a 70 million crowd out there. So probably you ask this later in the show, but come on, what will the Republican, will they remain a party, or will they become just a populist movement that are victimized by individuals that are either TV show stars or whatever? And this can happen to Germany as well. Not in the same way. Our constitution is differently, our history is different, our parties are different, but the idea of populism in democracies is a problem for all of us. Sorry for the long answer, but I think that's the truth to it.
Metin, I think you've raised an issue perhaps for another discussion that maybe I could have with the three of you or with others, because this has been a theme that's come up a couple times at recent American Council on Germany events, where some observers have said it's very difficult for America's two-party system to contain all of the factions within both parties that exist. And if you look at a country like Germany with its multi-party system and its ability to build coalitions, it's obviously a different system, but almost easier for different perspectives to be represented. But Metin, in your response, you touched on a question that we had from a viewer, which I would now like to pose both to Katja and to Christoph, which is, are there any lessons that can be learned for Germany by the number of people that voted for Trump this time around and by the election of Trump in 2016? Are you looking at that phenomena in a special way or in a different way, particularly as Germany approaches its own election in the fall of next year?
Well, I definitely agree with Metin that there is a deep crisis, and there was a deep risk to democracy, and that there's still a long way to go. And what we learn is that democracy has to be defended every single day, that we're in politics and that democracy can be at stake, and that it's just not safe. That's going to be, any of us will live in a democratic country forever. So we just have to be really careful about it. And I see it a little bit different than Christoph. It sounded a little bit like, well, maybe he's just the Republican that speaks a different language. No, I think he really he broke all the democratic consensus and the norms, and also put at question the rule of law. So we have to look at that closely. We need to look how are the United States dealing with it the oncoming months? How are they healing? And I found interesting what Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer said concerning the lessons for Germany, because she said to her own, looking at her own party, saying, we can see where it leads to if you start cooperating with the right-wing populists. That's nothing a Christian Democrat party should do. That's how I understood. I think it was a very interesting statement. And what she was, I understood what she was saying is, we have to keep away from AfD and keep our democratic consensus and never ever cooperate with the right wing, because then things can happen to us, like the Republican Party was taken over by Trump. I mean, if we look at 2 years ago at the midterm election, all the moderate Republicans lost their races against the extremes, right? So this is something that I think is relevant also for development in Germany.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Christoph, do you have anything to add?
Yes. So when you ask me what we can learn in Germany from the United States elections, I would answer it is not a good idea to blame or to condemn 70 million voters. So you can feel it a little bit in this discussion too. So I have a feeling that that all the voters, all the 70 million voters are voters in a democracy, and they voted a candidate, a presidential candidate. So that is the thing of democracy. But now there is a winner, and it is not good to play the game one against another. Of course, President Trump started that game, but that game is over now, or maybe will over in a few weeks. And we have to really ask us the question how we can bring together our societies. So if you have the Democratic Party and you have the Republicans, how not to split them more. And I think we have to give him a hand, show him, okay, we are willing to cooperate. And that is something which I really like in President-elect Biden, that he said from the first hour on, I will try to make compromises and I will listen to you. And that voters for Trump in the last election and in this elections didn't came up from nothing. So there are some issues, some problems where our society and your society have to handle this. And we as politicians and responsible people, like in the government or in the parliament or everything else, have to maybe relearn to listen more to the people's needs and not always go from top down, start more conversation. I know it's hard. We have some really political extremists. We have it in populists. We have it in Germany and in Europe too. But it is not a good idea to tell those people, oh, you voted Trump and you are out of the game and maybe you can try next time. But now, etchy betchy, we would say in Germany, some from different. Biden had won the election. We have to find a way to include that people and make them feel that they are a strong part of our society, even if we don't share their values or even if we don't share their opinion. We have to integrate them. That is something which is very important for our democracy.
Thank you. I'd like to sort of transition to talk about the transatlantic relationship a little bit. And we have one question that maybe helps with that from one of our viewers, who writes, I'm struck by the America First motto that seems similar to the Bush years following the Iraq War. Can you comment on the difference of your feeling today from 2008, when the era of George W. Bush came to an end and when there appeared to be a new dawn for German-American relations with President Barack Obama? Do any of you want to sort of take a shot at that? How do you feel today in 2020 as compared with how you felt in 2008?
Should I start?
Sure.
I find actually, well, good question, but still, I'm not really reminded of 2008, to be honest. In me looking back, I would say, obviously in Germany, not only because of the Iraqi war, but particularly because of the Iraqi war, it was super difficult in what security and international cooperation in security-wise was a problem, obviously. And there was, as you remember, Obama speaking before the election in Berlin, which was basically just a campaign, a democratic campaign event at the Siegessäule. I think it was totally different. And it was a sort of, looking back, I would say it was naive of the Germans thinking of, with Obama, everything will be totally going to be upside down to the past. So I think it was just different. And if you look at the especially security issues of Obama's years afterwards, I think it was not the opposite of what happened before. The Obama doctrine is highly disputed what it really means. I don't feel reminded of 2008. Today is, we still have the same challenges between the United States and Germany and the European Union, with all the good stuff to talk about, NATO, Nord Stream 2, climate change, trade, China. It's all still on the table. But the big change is we don't have a liar in the White House. And lying makes a difference. Okay, just to give you my last message on this one, on the crisis of democracy, one prerequisite of democracy is the public political speech, the dialogue between the people itself and the ones they got elect and the ones they elect, in between the people, the media, everybody. And one prerequisite is that when you say something that is wrong, it has to be named wrong and cannot be treated as just an opinion. That is one element of populism, to destroy democracy, to destroy the public dialogue, the public discourse, by just plainly lying. And this will be a lot more easier with Joe Biden and the administration. That does not mean that we are all in the same opinion. On the opposite, it probably shows us that we are having different opinions more than before, because the debate with Mr. Trump was really easy. It was just, it is from Mr. Trump, so game over. We cannot trust him. He's lying, that's it. Now we're having to get into an intercourse of dialogue, which is much more complex, and where we have to reflect different opinions. So it will be more difficult, but it will be something. So far, we didn't have anything because this guy destroyed everything. So now we are back to a very complex, challenging 21st century, where we have to, as open democratic societies, be rule setters for the world, for the better. And now we can start working on it, but it's just a start, nothing more.
Christoph, you're shaking your head. Do you want to comment on what Metin just said?
Yeah, I think it's drawn a pretty dark picture, and I read the text in the chat. So the German-American relationship is not down to zero, and it's not as terrible as some of you or the viewers think. Of course, we have a relationship. The United States is one of our most important partners, and we have the military bases from the United States in Germany. We have a very strong linked economy. We have cooperation in the science sector, and we have a new opponent in the world, that is China. And we have we need the NATO, we need the United States to cooperate. We cannot solve our problems on our own. Of course, we have issues with climate change and climate politics that will really change with President Biden elect. But it's not like the relationship between our two countries is destroyed. I was in the United States in February for 3 weeks, and I traveled through the countries. I visited the overfly states, and of course we have different opinions about how we have to handle the situation, and not everybody was glad that they had President Trump in the White House, even under my friends in the Republican Party. But it's not like we have to start from zero. We have a strong relationship, and I'm sure we will have it back in the next years. But as my colleague said, we still have issues where we have different opinions, like Nord Stream 2, or talk about the 2% goal. I am for the 2% goal, but that is nothing which divides President Biden from President Trump. And of course, we have the military issues. I think there is a very strong opinion in the United States that says Europe has to do more for their own security and for their own forces, because the focus of the United States will change. And that is something which doesn't makes a big difference between the administration of President Trump and President Biden. So things will be easier. Last sentence. Politics is about trust, and it's no secret that Chancellor Merkel and President Trump were not the best friends at all. And I think Angela Merkel has a very good relationship with President Biden, and for her last months, she will go out of office. That will be a very good fundament, a very good base for a trustful and responsible cooperation, and that will be a kind of new start.
Well, I was thinking a while over your question about what is different than 2008. And I think 2008, the difference was that there was something like enthusiasm in the air. I mean, it was, more trust in the future. Everything seemed possible in 2008 all of a sudden. With Obama and even, Global Zero, the end of nuclear weapons, everything seemed to be realistic. So enthusiasm is something that fits more to 2008, while while now, of course, we are glad to see the change, but we see so many difficulties ahead. We see so many problems ahead. We see how hard it will be for Biden to reunite his country. So that's a different atmosphere. And on the Republican side, I wouldn't say, like it was just, Trump was exceptional and everything else, was before that was fine. I think that Trump was a result of something developing already earlier. So the Bush era and the Republican Party itself must ask, it was a long-term development in American politics that in the end led to somebody like Trump. I mean, he didn't, fall from nothing. But so it's really going to be interesting what's going to happen to the Republican Party if they, recover, because they changed their basis so much. They first have to find a new base for the future, and then I would think it's necessary to think also about how could it happen? What happened? What did we do wrong in the past that somebody like Trump could come and take over this party? So I do think there is on the one side, there is a development that goes over years and years. And on the other side, the difference from Obama and Biden is the task that they have before them. And that's a different atmosphere.
I think,
Steve, can I add up on this one? Steve,
please.
One small point. Just on this, I give you an example on climate change. I turn the question to you. Do you think, what will be the US development? I expect Joe Biden getting back into the Paris Accords on January 21st. So, I hope Georgia is going to go well for the Senate, but looking at the numbers of the last 30 years, they will not win both seats. So in case the Senate is still, then coming back to what will the Republican Party do? Just taking one thought of that the majority will with the Republicans. So you're getting internationally with Europe back into the climate game, right? So everybody will be really cheering in Germany. That's a good thing what Joe Biden did. But then he shows up at home, and probably it will be super difficult to get anything done where he needs Congress, the Senate, to get anything done on the ground, investment-wise or whatever. So I think it will end up for us that we need to have collectively in Germany, in Europe, maybe in the world, a lot of patience with this administration to get something done, to get down from this polarization in the US society. And I'm not sure whether we are all patient enough for this one, because I don't know what the Republican Party will do. In 2008, you remember that, Obama tried more or less to buy out 1 or 2 seats out of the Senate for health insurance. And that didn't work out because the Republicans already decided we will destroy the whole thing before we make any compromise on this one. And the result, I believe, is also that Mr. Trump was only possible because of that polarization. So how will they decide this time? Will all those 51 Senate members, if they are 51, of the Republican side, will they go for a niet for the rest of the term? That is an important question that has also an influence on the German-U.S. relationship in the next 4 years.
So Metin, thank you for weighing in on that. I think that was an important point, and it provides a nice segue to sort of the next set of topics I want to talk about with the three of you. But I do think that the point that Katja made of 2008 and this sort of sense of euphoria around an agenda of hope and change versus today in 2020, where there's a daunting agenda ahead. One of the things that we haven't really talked about, you touched on it a little bit just now, Metin, I think the Biden-Harris administration will be largely focused on domestic issues to start with. Sure. Granted, those are domestic issues that have global consequences. The pandemic will be issue number 1. The economic crisis will be issue number 2. Social and racial justice will be issue number 3. And I think climate change comes after that. But I agree with you, on January 21st, the Biden-Harris administration will probably move towards joining the Paris Climate Agreement again. But this sort of context, I think, provides a good opportunity to talk about one of the questions that was raised by a viewer about perhaps one positive element of the Trump presidency, which has been that it has sort of forced European countries and the European Union to think a little bit more about being more independent of the United States when it comes to security and defense issues and foreign policy issues. And the viewer wants to know if that internal debate within Germany and within Europe will disappear under a Biden administration, or whether it will continue to be a point of discussion, partly because of some of the points that Metin was raising, that Europe will have to be patient in the months to come.
I don't know if independence is the right word, because of course we are all independent states. There was a lot of talk of sovereignty of Europe. Yeah. I mean, you know, Trump just showed us how complicated things in Europe are as well, because he managed very well to divide us where we were divisible. Not only Putin tried to divide Europe, but Trump did the very same. And it showed us how difficult it would be, because the important thing on the security is that Europeans, of course, need to learn to work together and to cooperate more on the security sector, which is very difficult right now because there's such a division among European states as well. And so some people say, well, I can understand Biden will probably have to deal about his domestic affairs and not care too much about Europe, so we can try to solve our problems maybe a little better because there's not an American president trying to divide us. So maybe at least this is a good thing to say, that Biden probably won't have any interest in dividing Europeans. Yeah, so that's the positive thing about it. But of course, we have a lot of problems ahead too on the European side. It's not only the American side. And that's our main problem with the, you know, like when we talk about the troops and the spending on military or the nuclear arms, of course, Poland and Germany, it's difficult if you have an American president that's kind of playing the game Polish against Germans, and hopefully we'll get over that.
Yeah, Christoph.
Yeah, you asked for the 2% goal, and I'm agreed to the questioner that that is one of the good things of the administration Trump, because he started a debate, a real debate, even in our parliament, and we started to raise our funding or raising our military budget, because I think that is one thing which is really necessary. And if it comes up to the question of capacity, there are still some things which our forces are not able to do. So when it comes up to communication or to med-evac or to surveillance or protecting airspace. So we have our military forces, even in Europe, are very strong linked with the US forces. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a new opponent, that is China. And even the US military is not capable to handle the whole security in Europe, Middle East, and in the South and East Pacific. And that is something I can totally understand. And that leads to the question that Europe and especially Germany have to do more for their own safety and security when it comes up to handling Russia, or even look at the Turks. That is a completely new situation which we have in the Middle East, or now in Azerbaijan or Armenia. We have a NATO partner which is acting not really like a NATO partner when it comes up to values. And that all brings us to the question what we can do more. And I'm a little bit afraid that that discussion will decline a little bit after when President Biden will not hold the pressure high on the European institutions and the German government as well, because it's a very hard discussion between the different parties in the German parliament if we spend more for our military forces or if we invested the budget in something else. So that it is a discussion, a very hard discussion at the moment.
Well, can I add one point? I forgot. There's something positive, because the foreign and security policy, he might be able to do more, even if he doesn't have a majority in the Senate. So these issues that we've seen that have been a big issue, like the Iran deal or the policy on the ICC or on the Open Sky Treaty. So there's a couple of things there that where the damage can be repaired maybe more quickly than the domestic problems at home can be sealed. So I think this is something I'm kind of hoping for and counting on, that these issues will move pretty fast.
Whether there was anything good with Mr. Trump's administration? No, there wasn't. Seriously, there wasn't.
Well, no. So not necessarily whether there was anything good about the Trump administration, but whether the debate within Germany and within Europe is one that will dissipate under a Biden administration, or if that's something that's sort of here to stay.
Well, that's academic. Of course, obviously the pressure was a lot higher to get the debate and stuff done, and it's still pressure is high. But if you separate this one issue, you try to get the imagination. This whole thing, the rest doesn't matter. It does matter. Imagine Mr. Trump would have won. You know what the next big election will be? It will be the French presidential election. What are we going to do on those subjects of security, European sovereignty and security, if this country gets lost to a populist movement? Basically, we don't have an answer on this. We are beyond this point of how individual relations are between countries and how this super big country, most important country, the United States, interacting with us. The NATO problem and the spending problem it's an old problem. And I get beaten up by my Democratic friends every single time on the spending issue. You don't have to be a Republican or Mr. Trump to be on that one, right? But we have a more sincere problem of whether, first of all, people believe in the institutions of their own country, and then the supranational institutions as the European Union or the cooperation between nations, and then NATO. Once you lose that belief in it, and Mr. Trump was doing everything to destroy the trust in NATO as an institution for Europeans, once you lose that, it's not a matter of how much money you spend. So no, there was nothing good with Mr. Trump, and yes, we still have a lot of really serious problems to solve and to talk about.
So let me ask you one final question, and it's the same question to each of you. If each of you had the opportunity to sit down for 15 minutes with President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, what are the 2 or 3 issues you would raise with them that are important for U.S. foreign policy, but for our purposes, important for shoring up the German-American relationship? Metin is laughing.
Well, okay, this is pure fantasy, right? So let's start. The fantasy would be, guys, think about some sort of social welfare system in the United States. That not millions of people in your country are just not believing in anything you can do for them. So this was an exception. So many million going to vote. This will not happen again. So Joe, if you want to survive the next populist wave, you have to deliver on folks where actually in the past you didn't do a good job. So look at Pennsylvania, look at Michigan. There are still a lot of losers out there, and the globalization race is going on, right? So it's still on, even if it's decreasing, it's still a problem. On the German-American, that is super difficult because there has to be a narrative on how we want to design, as open societies, as democratic societies, the international rules order. So let's take this example, China, because I think that's an important issue, and I think one can explain really good what the challenge is. We have to be together on imposing rules on China and not trying to pressure each other on particular rules on China between nations. So that's a super important thing. And who is in the driver's seat for that development? I would guess it's the United States. Who else should it be? So let's invite the rest of the world for a China conference on international rules regarding China. And then maybe the first conference could be in Washington, D.C., and the second one in Paris, or maybe in Hamburg. How is that?
Katja, Christoph, who wants to go next?
Well, on the international side, I would talk about also about international law and rule of law worldwide, and say, well, if we want to have peace and freedom for everybody, you know, we need to strengthen international organizations, international law, the United Nations, come back to the ICC, because this is, I think, the only way we can, you know, avoid having conflicts taken to a military point. That, you know, try to find legal ways to solve our problems in international institutions instead of going to war. And on the domestic side, well, that's interesting because, of course, he needs this majority in the Senate. But if, let's say, if he has this majority in the Senate, I would say, hey, you know, how the next 2 years, there's one thing he could do, just, you know, read the report of the OSCE on the election system and the the election law, and, you know, try to change maybe some things in the electoral system, starting from the registration up to the popular vote in the electorate. I mean, there's a real difficult, tough thing. I mean, we know that in the Bundestag how hard it is, you know, to find the solutions on election procedures. But if he has a chance in the next 2 years to do something on it, that would be a really big advantage.
And Christoph.
Yeah, first of all, it would be an honor to have 15 minutes with POTUS. My colleague said it before. I would ask him also to the relation of the strategy with China, and I would also wanted to talk to him about the strategy for the Middle East and the situation in Syria and in Israel as well. And if we then still may have some time, I would like to ask him if he is building up Kamala Harris for 2024. And the last question would be which TV series he prefers, because it was pretty obvious that President Trump really liked House of Cards. And I would ask him if he likes, or if he prefers Designated Survivor instead.
Well, thank you all. This has been a fabulous conversation. I don't know where the hour went, but I really want to thank you all for your openness, for being candid, but also for your nuanced observations of what's going on here in the US and how that impacts the German-American relationship and the transatlantic relationship writ large. Christoph Bernstiel, Metin Hakverdi, Katja Keul, herzlichen Dank. Many thanks to all three of you for making the time to do this. I look forward to staying in touch with you all. And to our viewers, thank you for the many questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but we got through a lot of them. And to everybody, stay well.
Well, thanks to you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Bye-bye.